Do you feel like you need God's encouragement and wisdom throughout the week to take hold of His promise to fly like an eagle? You've come to the right place. Welcome to Eagles on the Hill. Let's join our host, Pastor Jeff Scheich.
All right, people, I am your host, Pastor Jeff Scheich. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast of Eagles on the Hill. Search for Eagles on the Hill on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can subscribe to us in many different places. Find us, follow us wherever you listen. Follow us as we together follow Jesus and draw strength from Him to fly like an eagle. Today, a topic close to my heart, and that is homelessness and the People City Mission here in Lincoln, which I believe does just a super job at blessing people. And I just had some curiosity myself to find out more about their ministry, more about how we can be a part of that. And so wanted to have Pastor Tom Barber on from the People City Mission. So Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah. So tell us about homelessness in Lincoln. Is it stable? Is it decreasing, increasing? What's the status here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of increasing not just here, but really all over the country. You see, I know we see videos of places like LA and Seattle where a lot of them are going, folks are going. But I think all over the country, we're seeing a rise in people who just have nowhere to stay temporarily. And it's true in Lincoln, too, especially as we grow. And so we're seeing a constant influx of folks that come to the mission here.
Mm-hmm. So how does how does Lincoln care for the homeless? What are the various avenues that we have?
Well, the sad truth is right now we're kind of it. Most cities our size, they have more shelter space. I think Omaha has 4 shelters, all bigger than the People City Mission. About 2,000 people a night, and they're a little better than twice our size. But most cities the size of Lincoln have a lot more shelter space, usually 2 or 3 shelters. For whatever reason, the mission's been the only shelter in Lincoln since we started way back in 1907.
Wow.
And we were started 50 years before any other shelter in Nebraska. And I think we're the 26th or 27th oldest homeless shelter in the country. Reason for that partly is Lincoln had and still has the 3rd largest train yard in the country. So back at the turn of the century, most of the homeless at that point were hobos. They were And we just had a lot of hobos here. And so you had a little over 100 churches get together in 1907 and start the People City Mission.
Mm-hmm. So these other cities that have more homeless shelters, are those homeless shelters typically or often government funded, or are they all privately funded? Like People City Mission is basically privately funded, I believe.
Right.
Is that true?
We're a little unique there. Yeah, it's a combination. Most shelters, if they're small, like you might go to Kearney or something, they tend to be more privately funded, or what we call public funding, public donations. When you get to be the size of the mission, I think last year we generated over $20 million. And so when you start to get into that zone, and I think we helped a little over 30,000 people here in the city unduplicated, most of those shelters get some federal and state funding, usually 20 to 30%, sometimes more, that they'll get funded from the government. What we're a little unique is that we don't. Less than 2% of our money comes from any kind of grant. That includes the United Way. We don't take any federal money, but we have some state and local funding. But it's like 1.5% of our revenue base. So we're a little unique in that way. So again, we're a big homeless shelter that is funded through public giving, almost exclusively, and that is very rare here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I imagine that gives you some more flexibility in what you do. I'm imagining. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, it gives us more flexibility. Obviously, a little bit harder because we have to rely on folks, and our average donation, Jeff, is I think $300-400, and that's on a $20 million budget. So we have I think 32 or 33,000, and I have to look at the number, households that actually fund us.
Wow.
Then we have a couple of businesses and about 120 churches or so that give us some funding too. So we mainly get our money from the public, and then we have a business venture, recycling, that we do that also generates some money for us too.
So you indicated homelessness population growing around the country, here in Lincoln as well. So is there a need for People City Mission to expand in terms of its housing capacity, or tell me about that?
Yeah, there not only is that we are just in the process of buying the land in front of us. So our goal in the next 3 to 5 years is to double the size of the mission. We plan to build a brand new family shelter, and then turn our entire facility here into a men's shelter. So we'd be able to double the size and scope of what we do, and maybe get us up to 600, 700 people a night that we could actually shelter at the mission. And Lincoln's problem in the future is not going to be transient guys. Um, uh, most of the guys who kind of walk around the country and go different places gravitate towards the East Coast, and even more so the West Coast, the South, where the weather's better. Our panhandling's not great here. We're kind of conservative when it comes to panhandling. And then in San Francisco, they'll give you a cell phone. I don't give anybody a cell phone. So if I'm a transient guy, why would I come to Lincoln, Nebraska, unless there's
Right.
some nexus here? They're not. Our big issue is going to be what we call the crisis homeless, not people that are chronically homeless, but folks that maybe had a one-time issue that became homeless because we're more suburban. Leading cause of that is domestic abuse. We don't have a hard stat in Lincoln about who's or how many people are being abused or in a domestic violence situation. We have a federal stat that's very hard, and that's 1 in 4 women are being abused in the United States. We know that for sure.
Mm.
Um, might be 1 in 5 in Lincoln because we're a little more religious, a little more conservative, but that would be 30,000 women, as you and I are doing this podcast. They're in an abusive situation right here in our city. And even if 5% needed to leave home, that's a couple thousand women. And that doesn't include their children. We have 2 other agencies, Friendship Home and Fresh Start, that deal with domestic abuse in particular. But they have less beds than we do. And if you put us all together, you got 300 or 400 beds. So what happens with most of them is they couch surf. And so many cases, that's okay. They stay with family or friends, and it's a safe environment. But in a number of cases, it's not a safe environment. And I think that's the future for Lincoln as you look at the next 20 years. It's going to be the crisis homeless because we're more of a suburban. I don't see us becoming a Seattle or a LA where you have big encampments. Again, we don't have the weather for that. But I think the crisis homeless is going to be what we see expanding. I think domestic abuse is a plague on our society. I think that's growing and continues to grow. And so I think as we look at building the mission, our real focus is trying to build a lot more capacity for women and kids, and particularly for the crisis homeless.
So how do you measure, I'm sure you measure success, like this was a successful year, this was a successful 5 years, whatever. How does the People City Mission measure, yeah, we're successful in what we're trying to accomplish? How do you do that?
Oh, part of our metrics, right? Well, we have a couple of them. The first one is we survived. That's a good one. So we didn't lose any money or very much money. So we raised a little over 20 million last year, mainly from public giving. We spent that, and so we didn't lose any money, but we had to obviously we did that to support what we're doing. So we count that a victory when we don't lose a lot of money at what we do, or we get enough money to keep doing, help feed and shelter the homeless that are coming to us, and so that's one metric. We have a church here, Connections, and we are obviously a faith-based organization. We don't force anybody to go to chapel or force Jesus on anybody, but we certainly share them when we're able. And I think we have about 100 or so people in the church, and so we also look at how many people we've been able to bring to Christ, or how many people are baptized, how many people we influence there. That's another metric we have. We count as success because we're not just about food and shelter. We're also about advancing God's kingdom, and so we try to do that, obviously, and when we're able to, that's a big value to our feeling of success. And then I think we also just count a number of folks we help with our various programs. One of the things in Lincoln is everybody knows the mission, and excuse me, they know about us. Most people don't know what we do, and so when we tell them, like, some of the programs we have, they're not aware of. Our help center saw 28,000 people last year, unduplicated. We helped over 10,000 kids in the city. We're the safe place guys where people can go. we have a a rehabilitation program in alcohol where people can go. We help the state with prisoners and with uh, parole and probation. We're doing detox for the city. I mean, I could go on and on.
Right,
A
right.
lot of stuff people are totally unaware of, and all the things we do. They hear the mission and they think we're a homeless shelter, which is we are. We're Lincoln's only homeless
Hmm.
shelter. So part of our goal too is just to make sure we're successful in the various programs we do, and
Hmm.
and we have a number of them, and so we each of those have their own goals and their own metrics of success. So
Hmm.
it's not just one in totality, but it's also a lot of different specific ones.
Right, right. A couple questions about kind of personal, practical kinds of things, both for individuals and churches.
Yeah,
I know people have often talk about, that you mentioned the panhandler kind of thing, and I think I've heard you say before on multiple occasions, don't give money to panhandlers. So
great.
what should be our approach as we pass a panhandler coming out of a supermarket or whatever? How do we handle that? What's the best way? Give us some advice.
Yeah, well, people panhandle for different reasons. I often say it actually starts not with the panhandler, but with you.
Okay.
And the question really is when you give, that's part of your resources, and your especially as believers are sowing in the kingdom of God. So you should hold those with the same value you hold your 401k.
Mm,
You don't just invest in anything; you invest in what you think is going to be profitable, and
mhm,
we ought to be doing that too with our giving. It turns out with panhandling, at least in Lincoln, probably a third of the people out there, even more now, aren't homeless at all. They're just people looking for some extra money.
mm,
And you can tell a real homeless person, see if the stuff around their feet, if they've got clothing that, because if there's nothing down below, they're not homeless. Because homeless people who are not at the mission and need the panhandle because they haven't need a place to go, all the belongings are around their feet. And so that's
mm,
the first thing to look. But many of our guys at the mission who do panhandle, even some of those guys, are not happy about the fact there's a lot of people who just struggling a little financially, and so they panhandle. And
mhm,
and that's what folks don't realize is that when you're giving to people like this, many aren't homeless, and those who are, majority of those, we have 80% of all of the chronically homeless guys. So 80% are staying at the mission and just looking for some extra money. So sometimes people will feel good about giving a dollar or $5 to somebody. They go out
mm,
and get drunk, and guess where they come tonight to?
mm,
Back to us. And now we're dealing with a drunk guy because someone wanted to be philanthropic and give them some money. And so it isn't always the best thing to do.
mhm,
Once in a very long time will you find somebody who doesn't know about the mission, just needs money to eat or do something. That is really rare. That's less than certainly 5% of any of the panhandlers you're going to see out there.
mm,
Lincoln's got a good network. Most people know where the food and shelter are. There's plenty of it people can go to. But the reason they're panhandling is usually for other things, and many times things that people necessarily wouldn't want to give them.
mm. So it sounds like a good thing to do if your heart is moved by that, and we should be, is support the mission or support Matt Talbot Soup Kitchen or those kinds of things.
Yeah, different,
Where,
right.
yeah, yeah, good.
Yeah, no, again, Lincoln's got a number of programs at Gathering Place, Matt Talbot, the Mission.
Mhm,
We house about 80% of the homeless in the city. We
mhm,
do about 220,000 meals a year. I think Matt Talbot at least does 100 or a little bit more, and I
mhm,
think the Gathering Place is pretty close to that. So
mhm,
there's plenty of food available to
mhm,
folks out there if they
mhm.
want it. Um,
Good.
it just kind of depends on what people feel like. But if they really feel like they got to do something personally, give somebody panhandling something, go buy them a cheeseburger and give them that. Don't give them.
Mm. Right, right. Buying food. So, last question: what can churches do to address issues like homelessness and poverty in the city? What should churches be doing?
Well, I think they can get more involved. Historically, what happened, Jeff, is before Johnson's Great Society in the '60s, churches were the primary way things got done, like at the Mission, Catholic
Hmm.
Social Services, Lutheran Family Services. That were the predominant nonprofits in the city, and people donated. After the government got involved in the '60s, a lot of groups popped up, and the churches, for the most part, tended to go back in their four walls and kind of let the government do it. And so they got out of the business of really being that involved in what's going out there. And nature abhors a vacuum, so a lot of sector groups picked all that up and became became it. So you see a lot of these groups out there that obviously are funded through different means, but they're not faith-based or anything, and that's fine. But they've sort of occupy the territory that the churches used to have.
Hmm.
And so now some churches want to get back into it, but there's really not a lot of places for them to go.
Hmm.
And so they have to kind of pick what they're going to do. But I think one of the reasons I think the Lord has made the mission so big now, I think we and the food bank are the two biggest groups, is we can become somewhat of a highway for churches to get back into it, at least one of the ways they can.
Hmm.
So it's not so much, I think, in our minds, what the churches can do for us, but what we can do for the churches.
Hmm.
Most churches want to do their own program or do something that's connected to their church. And the mission can do that. We've had some churches now, for instance, that want to do street outreach. So they're getting on our shuttle bus and they're going with them and handing out sack lunches and water and kind of using our resources to do their program. Or,
Hmm.
um, they do, I know Christ Place just did a big backpack program where they wanted to give kids backpacks. So they came to our help center, which has all these people, 10% of Lincoln shopping there, and they gave away tons of, backpacks and did it. And so if churches wanted to get back into it in any meaningful way, they're probably going to have to go through some group at this point because
Hmm.
most of that ground is taken. And at
Right.
least with the mission, we're faith based, and so you can share your faith. But I think we're trying to create opportunities for churches to get back into helping out, find out what God's calling them to do. Many years ago, I worked for a retired four-star general, and he told me something I never forgot. I was working with a company called TRW. It was a Fortune 20 company. He said, Tom, nothing becomes dynamic until it becomes specific. And I
Hmm.
really found that to be true today. I think churches can be a lot more powerful out there in what they do if they become very specific in something they think God's calling them to do, and they do that. If it's
Right.
something we're doing, they can connect to the mission. If it's something else, connect with another group. But I think they're going to have to do that and find ways to use what's there, because again, it's been taken. The churches used to be those guys; they're not
Right.
anymore, and
Right.
they're going to have to find their way back.
Good, good. That's some good advice, and really, the churches and we as individual Christians can provide so much more tailored personal care for people than the big government entities. So that's good advice. So thanks, Tom. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for all you do at the mission, leading that and leading the city of Lincoln to bless people. So, I want to thank you for joining the podcast today.
Honored. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Well, that's what we got for you today. We want to encourage you to write us at eaglesonthehill211@gmail.com. That's all one word, no spaces, dots, dashes, underscores, eaglesonthehill211@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of today's program. Let us know what kind of topics you'd like us to talk about. We'd love to hear from you. Again, subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, subscribe to us, follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And let's continue to remember the promise of God in Isaiah 40 that those who hope in the Lord will fly on wings like eagles. So have a great day. Thanks for joining us.